Well, hello. It's time for us to have another lecture on church administration, finance, and law. And um, let's go to the Lord in prayer, ask Him for His help, and I know that He will give it to us. Father, we thank you. Truly, this is a day that you have made. We make the quality decision to rejoice and to be glad in this day. We ask Holy Spirit for wisdom and revelation and understanding. We ask that you would help us, Lord. Help me as I share spiritual truth. Help each of us as we learn and grow and grasp. We ask you to bless us with your presence. Do a work in our lives and teach us what you would have us to know and understand. We thank you for it. We believe you for it. We're expecting that you're going to show up in this class session and ask you to accomplish your divine purpose in each and every one of us. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, hopefully, if you're listening to this, you've been able to listen to the other one and respond. I've only had a couple people respond so far with their weekly reflection, and one of them has given me two weekly reflections. One's given me one, and so I do have some. As we start, I want to go over some of those comments and those questions. Uh, Let me reiterate that I'm not really sharing things from the book um, personally. I know you're reading the book, and that's where some of your questions are going to be coming from. But I just, in an ordination class, I don't think it's needful for me to rehash the book. You ought to be able to, at this point in your ministry, understand it, and if you do need clarification or you have questions, you want my input on something, put that on your reflection papers, and I'll be happy to respond to it to the best of my ability. But what I'm going to be doing is sharing other things, and I'm going to do the same thing this lecture as I did last lecture. That is, I'm going to be dealing with things in regard to the pastor himself, his family, uh, being able to administrate your own life, um, and therefore it'll translate into ministry in the church life. So let me begin by just going over a couple of these weekly reflections and questions from some that have turned them in, and I know others are coming. Um, just highlight a few thoughts here that this student said the evolution of the new church leader is one that intrigues me, and you know, piggybacking on what I talked about, and I'm sure your book even mentions that church administration, church leadership is not the same as it once was. It has evolved and it's continuing to evolve. I probably mentioned this last week, but in my opinion, even though this textbook is an older book, if we were to use a book that was written last year, it would still be outdated in some ways because as the society evolves, as people evolve, so does leadership have to evolve. And this student said one of my greatest weaknesses is communication with my volunteers. Um, what I think in my head is not always communicated to the people. Boy, can I identify with that. And I think we all identify with that, which just speaks to the issue that we need to make sure we can articulate where we're going, that we have a well thought out plan, that we learn how to verbalize to our congregations um, and to our volunteers our thoughts, our hearts, our intents. But he said to further communicate things is that when I do communicate the information, some of the people don't even read or listen to what I sent out. Welcome to the world of ministry. I mean, that's just the way it is, and that's why you have to say it over and over and re-communicate it and say it in different ways. I do that from the pulpit. I do that in preaching. Um, I'll take the same concept and I might preach on it for a year by just going at it from different angles and different ways. And Sunday morning, as we were in service, and one of our worship leaders began to share from her heart, I leaned over to my wife and I said, some of them are beginning to get it, little by little, little by little. And so you have to realize, number one, they're not going to get it the first time, sometimes not the second, third, fourth, or even fifth time. You just have to keep going over it. And then this person also brought up having a problem with connecting with conflict in ministry. Um, uh, and they made an interesting statement. As I'm learning to navigate through conflict, I've made some mistakes. That's a very positive statement. It could be viewed negatively, but it's a very positive statement. Because I think the problem with too many people is they make mistakes and they don't realize it. They make mistakes and they still try to blame the people. They make mistakes and they still try to blame others. But the sooner you and I live up to the fact that some of the issues and problems we're facing as leaders is because of the mistakes we've made, the quicker we can get out of that and the quicker we can move forward. So it's a very positive statement. And so, but they went on to say that that if we're not careful, sometimes we tend to throw some of our leaders under the bus in order to keep peace. We got to be careful. We can do that with our spouses. We can do that with some of our leaders. We can throw them under the bus in order to keep peace. We cannot do that. You can't throw your people under the bus. I remember one staff member I had one time that was facing some issues, and there were mistakes they had made, but some of what they were facing was no direct result of their own mistakes, and yet some of the things were. And I made sure when I was talking to them about what was going on in their ministry and parents that were upset and so on and so forth, I was very open with them about the areas I felt they as a leader had missed it and the mistakes they had made. But then my next statement to them was, but don't ever forget this. I will never throw you under the bus. I'm going to support you. It doesn't mean that I won't say to a parent sometime, well, yeah, that was not a wise thing to do, and we're dealing with that. But I'm never going to throw the person under the bus. And we have to be careful that we do not do that for the sake of peace, because I guarantee you it's going to cause more conflict in other areas, especially with those that are the closest to you. So there was a few questions on this reflection here. How do you avoid getting calloused and cautious when dealing with people you invested in and they turn around and hurt you? Very, very applicable and present issue. And what I have learned in ministry is, and listen carefully to me, the ones you tend to do the most with, or the most for, let me put it that way, the ones you tend to help the most have the biggest tendency to come back and turn on you. And you have to, the question was, how do you avoid getting calloused and cautious? We have to avoid being calloused. I don't think we have to avoid being cautious. Okay, you've heard the statement, you do something bad to me once, shame on you. If I let you do it twice, shame on me. Okay. I don't think it's wrong for us to be cautious, but it is wrong for us to get calloused. And there's a hymn. I call it a hymn that Bill Gaither wrote years ago, and it goes something like this: there are times when living and loving brought pain, and I promised I would never let it happen again. But I found out that loving is well worth the risk, for it that even in losing you win. And we cannot allow ourselves not to love. We cannot allow ourselves not to continue to help. We cannot allow ourselves not to continue to reach out to people, because after all, that's what ministry is all about. But we can still be cautious. We can still say, when they come back again, I love you. I'm here for you. I'll help you, but I'm not going to allow you to do to me what you did to me once before. See, and so how do I avoid being calloused? Well, it's just 46 years of ministry now has helped me learn um, how to watch for those warning signs in my life, and you go to God and you get in His Word and you pray and you listen to teaching that helps you uh, realize how dangerous it is to let offense get in your life or callousness, and you just keep working at it. To this day, there are times when those walls begin to come up, and I have to make sure that I work at it so that I don't allow it to affect my ministry. Next question. How would you change an elder board that was controlling and not supporting your vision? Very, very good question. The problem with that, and the problem with trying to answer that, is all our churches have bylaws, constitution and bylaws. And so we have to go by our constitution and bylaws. We can't just go by spiritual principles. And that's sad to say, but that's the way it is. So if I have an elder board, if I have a deacon board that's trying to control me and not support the vision, and my bylaws instruct that they're elected by the people, and so on and so forth, you have to be strong enough in your identity and in your leadership to not let them do it. I remember a very interesting what's the word I want? Scene in a movie I saw one time where a police chief was being called on the board by the city council of the small town, and they were, just getting on him real bad, and all of a sudden they told him they wanted him to do such and such and such and such, and he said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." They said, "Do you know that we have the power to hire and fire you?" And he said, "Yeah, you've hired me, and if you want to, you can fire me, but you can't tell me how to do my job." And he had that assurance that he knew how to do the job, and they recognized it too. So you have to be stronger than they are. I've heard one preacher say, "How do you overcome those who are against you? You just outlive them." You have to not bow to their tactics. And there might be a point to where you have to sit them down one by one and say, if we can't come to some agreement, I'm going to ask you to resign your position. And of course, you could have a fight on your hands. But in answering it in another way, the best way is to change your bylaws. And I'm a firm believer, and if you've been in my classes, you've heard me say this. I'm not a believer in voting. I think voting is just organizing dissension in most cases, and so one church I pastored, I eventually changed the bylaws from stating that there's a nominating committee and we nominate people and then the church votes on them and then they become the board, to the pastor selects his board, appoints his board. But here's the thing. I didn't do it in a 1 month period. I did it in 5 years. I started with bringing the board along with more scriptural guidelines for leadership. I then, every year in the annual business meeting for 5 years, I started talking to the church about it, and we started searching scripture as a church and seeking God as a church. And after 5 years of doing this, we eventually voted to change our bylaws to where the pastor was allowed to appoint his board. And if he's the right kind of pastor, and by the way, a church shouldn't have one if they don't have confidence in him to begin with, he's not going to appoint yes men. He's going to appoint people who will challenge him, and they're strong in their own personality, but they won't be antagonistic. They'll work with him, and he'll listen to them, and then together they'll make decisions. One of the greatest board uh, hybrids I have ever seen is in this book, and I guess it's backwards to you, The Blessed Church by Robert Morris. And in here he talks about a hybrid board setup that is excellent. And I won't go into it right now, but you may want to purchase that book and read it. If it does interest you for me to go into it, just let me know in your reflections, and I'll be happy to go into it. But there's different ways of governing, and so to change an elder board that's controlling and not supporting your vision, you can't do it overnight. I wouldn't advise a novice to do it, but they have to know that while you disagree with them, you love them and you love the church, and the changes you're making are for the benefit of the church. So I hope that this time of what I'm doing right now with these reflections helps you. That's why I'm asking you to send me the reflections. And if you haven't done so yet, please do so. This same person in their second week's response, he says one of the things that interested him in, I don't know if it was a lecture or the reading, is to consider the human fact when hiring people, how they fit into your team, the moral factor, and the scope and stretch of the job. When you're hiring people, I'm trying to remember, I think it's, is it John Maxwell? And the three C's, what are they? Character. First you're looking for character, then you're looking for chemistry, and then you're looking for competency. The problem with too many pastors and hiring people is they start with competency. I need somebody that's competent that I don't have to train. Well, you can find competent people you don't have to train, but if their character's not right, or their chemistry with the rest of the team isn't right, you're going to have headaches every single day. You can teach competency. You can't teach character. Well, you can, but most people are already set in their character, and it's hard to teach chemistry. So the things the three things to look for first is character. I'm not going to hire somebody with their own character. Number two is chemistry. How will this person fit with the rest of the ministry team? And third is competency. I would rather hire somebody with great character and good chemistry that maybe doesn't know the job yet, but I can train them to do the job. Okay. He said, I've seen some ministers who are all about the ministry and very little about the administration. It'll come back and bite you. You either have to learn how to do administration and make yourself do it, even if you don't enjoy it, or you need to hire somebody with character and chemistry and competency that has these skills of administration that you can work through. Okay? But you can be the best preacher in the world, have the best pastor's heart in the world. Everybody can love you, and you can fail miserably if you don't take care of the administrative details. He says he was struck by the book's emphasis on organizations. And when I say organization, I mean keeping a neat place. Offices need to be kept orderly. Everything needs to have a place. And then he went on to say, so how do you balance the creativity of people who aren't the most organized people? Do you implement office standards? And if so, does that create a stifling, stiff environment that everyone doesn't feel comfortable in? A lot of questions there. Let me try to give some clarity to it. First of all, our offices should be neat and clean. In my opinion, if our office is neat and clean, it talks to us something about our personal life. Okay? Now, I understand that some people that are very creative are not very neat. They know where everything's at, but they're not very neat. One of the TV programs I watch on Netflix sometimes is called Numbers. These are very intellectual professors, and it shows their offices, and there's stacks of papers, and there's piles of books, and that's how they think. That's how they function. They know right where things are and everything. And yet, I think there needs to be something said about neatness and cleanliness for people coming in to our areas. Um, one pastor I'm thinking about, he's passed away now, was Glenn Cole. And when he built his church, you walked into his office. It was this huge office, and you walked into it, and it was as neat as in fact, he himself in his garage had that green turf grass on his garage floor. Everything was in place. Um, but you walked into his office and nothing was out of place. Everything was dusted and clean. And you walked in and he could sit there with you and talk with you. But he had a wall there with a door in it. And you walked through that door and he had his working desk. And in his working desk, in his library there, books were all over the place because maybe he was in the middle of studying and had to go to an appointment and didn't want to put everything away. And he was able to go right back to it. So that's a good way to do it if you got the room. In fact, as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about, boy, that wouldn't be bad if I could figure out a way to do that. So he had his working office, and then he had his office that was open to the public. But yes, you have to have some office standards. Um, and if you don't, things are going to get out of hand. So you know. Lastly, the budgeting of funds was an interesting topic. There's only so much money in the pot, and with 50% or more going to staff, how do you as a senior pastor and board disseminate funds to serve the congregation? Well, I say to this student who wrote this, I wish that was my problem. I wish that 50% of more of my income was going to staff. In reality, 50% or more of my income, and in fact more than 50%, is going to building, the mortgage, and the upkeep of this building that had been purchased prior to my coming. And so, therefore, we can't hire staff that we need to hire. I wish 50% or more was going to staff. But anyway, the point being here, with a huge portion of it going to something other than the other ministries, is I think what he's talking about here. Let's see. Makes this statement outside, we can only spend what we have in our department. I have a theory, and it goes like this. Every tub needs to sit on its own bottom. Heard that from John Osteen. In other words, every department needs to take care of itself. Every department needs to fund itself. Some churches are known for funding departments, and if your church is big enough and can do that, and you're on staff there, you are blessed. But most churches, that's not the case, and every department has to figure out how to fund themselves. And this person goes on to say they've had to fight and scratch to get their senior pastor to share in their vision. Well, let me just say it this way. Every senior pastor should share in the people's vision, but that doesn't mean every church should support that ministry. That means that ministry has to figure out how to support itself. And so anyway, there's ways of doing it. You just have to work at it. Let me look at another one here. Another student. Let's see. Now, one statement they made here is, I was not prepared to address people that were beyond reasoning. Oh, welcome to the ministry. You think something should be understood by everybody, and some people, they just don't understand it. And you're wondering, what about this don't you understand? But that's the way it is. Okay, so this person said, where's my book here? Oh, right here. And I must have a different edition than them because I had to find these things on different page numbers. For me, it was page 69. For them, it was page 76 in their book. The question is, in the book Church Administration Handbook, it speaks to personal rewards for volunteers. Talks about achievers, affiliators, and power people. Could you speak to class a bit more on role and rewards of these? Well, um, let me see if I can find it here. First of all, on the other page there, it's ministering through committees. To me, that's almost fruitless. Personal rewards for volunteers. Let's just read it here. Rewards for volunteers. Doesn't that idea fly in the face of the definition of a volunteer? As a person who serves freely by personal choice? Not really. It's true that volunteers do not receive wages, fringe benefits, or bonuses. But volunteers do receive psychic and spiritual rewards. Consider these personal rewards for volunteers. Number one, they're contributing to a vital cause. Some persons find great satisfaction in being part of a goal-oriented organization. They join with other folks on the same mission and feel the exhilaration of being on the team. These volunteers are concerned with excellence, production, problem solving, and the achievement of goals. Another reward for volunteers is enjoying the fellowship of like-minded persons. These volunteers relish being with other persons in whose company they feel comfortable. They value warm and friendly relationships and enjoy listening, sharing information and feelings, and giving encouragement to others. And thirdly, another reward for volunteers is influencing individuals and groups. These volunteers want to be heard, like to have their advice heeded, and enjoy position and prominence. They generally hold strong opinions, are outspoken and fluent, sometimes like to debate issues and win arguments, and intend to change others. Hopefully, their major concern at this point is to invest their influence in aspiring and empowering others to reach group goals. Now, that last statement is very important, in my opinion, in rewarding them. Hopefully, their main concern at this point is to invest their influence in aspiring and empowering others to reach group goals. A lot of times, these power people, that is not their main motivation. Their main motivation is to get things done their way. And that's the sad part. So these three categories of volunteers have been called achievers, affiliators, and power people. Achievers serve their volunteer organization. They're achieving something best by organizing new products and programs, by solving challenging problems, and by brainstorming possibilities and options. They love to do that. Second is the affiliators. They nurture and lend support by counseling, greeting, listening, and acting as hosts and hostesses because they love belonging. And the third are the power people, the movers and shakers who raise money, persuade others to join in, and generally keep the organizational structures moving forward in positive directions or backward in reactionary modes. In other words, each of these types of volunteers is needed in churches and other volunteer agencies. Additionally, each of these volunteers receives personal rewards. Yes, volunteers are paid in service, recognition, growth, challenge, results, love, and teamwork. So, the question here is personal rewards for them. Can you speak, class, more about roles and rewards of these? Well, every volunteer, in my opinion, should be rewarded in some way. We do it in different ways. One way, and especially in my situation where because of most of our money going to pay for a building, I can't hire needed staff. In order to have staff on board, one of the things that I can offer them as payment is mentoring, is helping them grow and learn so that they can be more effective in their own ministry, both in the church and when they move on to another location. So that is a reward, in my opinion. Another way we reward volunteers on staff is once in a while we'll take an offering for our volunteer staff and we'll split it between them. Or if they have a financial need comes up, the car breaks down or whatever, sometimes we can help with that. Or I can send them to district council and different things, ways of rewarding them. Periodic, we haven't done this since I've been at the church. We've only done it once, but in the past I've done it every year. I know I need to do it again now. Here is we have a volunteer appreciation banquet. We started that in the Bay Area many years ago, where once a year we had a banquet where where all our volunteers didn't have to do any of the work. The staff did the work. Um, and we give them a free dinner, a very good dinner. We have gifts for everybody. We highlight a few people that have gone above and beyond that year and give them a very nice gift. Everybody else gets nice gifts, but not extremely expensive. You say, how do you fund this? My wife um, kept found deals all year long and stored them up. She got businesses sometimes to give things to this, and so we just blessed our people that way. You have to let them know you appreciate them, but each of these groupings, these what's the term he gave them? Achievers, affiliators, and power people get their rewards in different ways. In other words, the achievers, they get their reward by being given a responsibility and working at it and seeing it produce. Affiliators, they get their rewards by being able to communicate with people and get to know the people and a sense of belonging. The power people, they get their rewards by being able to influence the influencers at times, or do something that only they can do. Um, uh, and these power people, they have to see things happening. So do the achievers. They have to see things happening, and they get tired and burned out, and they leave if they're not seeing things happen. And so you just figure out ways to honor them and to reward them when you don't have the money to do so. And then number two, could you speak to the process of delegating, the do's and don'ts of delegating? And that was in the book as well. Delegating is a very sensitive subject. One reason is because a lot of people don't want to delegate. A lot of people don't know how to delegate. A lot of people are afraid to delegate. A lot of people have delegated and got burnt. So, in my opinion, I think probably the most efficient way, the hard and fast rule, is when it comes to pastoral delegation. Oh, my coffee's cold now. When it comes to delegation by a pastor, we should be delegating anything that we're not the only one that can do it. In other words, if I'm constantly doing things other people could be doing, then I'm not delegating correctly. I need to be training people to do it, getting them to do it so that I can get to the things that aren't being done. I'm not the best one in the world to be talking about this, honestly. But I have learned some things. Let me say this about dues of delegation. Inspect what you expect. In other words, if you expect somebody to get something done, make sure you inspect it so that it was done correctly. And if not, then you have to deal with it. So inspect what you expect. Some people, when they delegate, they just keep their hands off and never do anything with it. And if it gets done, praise the Lord. And if not, somebody's in trouble. Others, when they delegate, they micromanage, and the person they've delegated it to cannot get anything done. So you have to inspect what you expect. Here's another thing about delegation. You'll never properly delegate unless you understand personalities of people. We talked about personalities a little bit last lecture, I believe. If you don't understand the personalities of people, you will not know how to properly delegate. Why? Because different personalities have different strengths and weaknesses. As an example, in talking about delegation, if you have, let's say you have a choleric and you have a phlegmatic, and if you don't know those terms, you need to do some study on it. The choleric is the take charge, can do anything personality. The phlegmatic is well, they're loyal, but they're not super achievers. They're not self motivators. And if it doesn't get done today, it can get done tomorrow type people. So if you have let's say you have a phlegmatic, and you say to that phlegmatic, we're here at point A and we need to get to point Z. Figure out a plan and tell me how to get from point A to point Z. Show it to me and then do it. That phlegmatic's going to freeze because they don't know how to get from point A to point Z. Okay? What you have to do with the phlegmatic is you have to say, we're at point A, we want to get to point Z. Do this, 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 and this. And they'll get it done. Okay? But if you go to the choleric and you say, we're at point A and we need to get to point Z, do this, 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 and this, they'll think, whether they say it or just think it, they're going to be thinking, why do you need me? You know how to do it. So you go to the choleric and you say, we're at point A and we need to get to point Z. Figure out a plan how to get there, run it by me, and then let's get it done. And they, yes, sir. And they're there because that's their personality. They're a take charge personality. So delegation has to take into effect the personalities of the people you're dealing with. You can't deal with everybody the same way. You can't delegate to everybody the same way. And so, anyway, just a few things. If you want more information on these things, put it in your reflections. I'll go about it from a different way. But I thought it's good to take this time and to deal with some of these questions that you might have. Okay? So, that being said, if we were in class right now, I would say, okay, who has any questions or comments? And we talk about it a little more, but we can't do that with this type. Let me look at the syllabus for just a minute. The assignments, you're supposed to be doing this weekly writing assignment, relating each week's reading and appropriate lecture concepts to your present ministry assignments. And using the material to help address a ministry need will make the best use of this class for ministry purposes. It's a 3-page maximum. And then finish it with some questions that you would like addressed. And of course, you're reading your textbook. 30% of the class is just your reading. Your weekly assignments is 30%, and then your final exam at the end of the 5 weeks will be 40% of your grade. Okay, that being said, let's go a little further. I told you I'm going to deal with things in relationship to the administration of the pastor, his family, his church, in a personal way, and so let me just share with you, first of all, just from some notes that I've got from other classes and stuff that will help in this. 3 priorities of the pastor. Here's 3 of your priorities as a pastor that you always need to keep in mind. Number 1 is your relationship with the Lord. Your devotional life is absolutely critical, and we'll talk a little later about our devotional life. The second priority of a pastor is your relationship with your spouse and your children. In other words, spouses and children can become bitter with the ministry if you're not taking care of them and putting a priority upon them. And the third priority is the work of the ministry. And so, and they should fall in those, in that form. Your relationship with God, your relationship number 2 with your spouse and your children, and number 3, the work itself, the relationship with the work. But along with these primary priorities, there are some secondary priorities. And when it comes to ministry and properly administrating the church, number 1, give ample time to the preaching of God's word. You are supposed to nourish the people spiritually. And so if you're not nourishing them spiritually, your church is going to be weak and emaciated, and it's going to come back and bite you, okay? Here's something else. Anything lasting in the church is going to come from prayer and fasting. So as a pastor, you need to be studying the word. You need to be praying and fasting, spending that time, bringing the church along in those things. The church should be involved in evangelism. reaching people. Um, and granted, it depends upon your particular church. We're struggling there a little bit in our church, and one reason is because of the fact that um, that our church has been older, and so we've been trying to gain new families, and now what we have is older people and new families. And guess what? Older people have a hard time getting around for evangelism, and new families have a hard time finding time for evangelism. So we're struggling somewhat, but we're going to find that balance. We're working on it. We're going to find that balance. The church must be involved in missions, both local and worldwide. As we speak right now, I'm uh, developing a missions emphasis for this year in a few months here, and was working on it last night some. Every church has to have a discipleship program of some type. Right now, our church does not have an organized discipleship program, but the way we function as pastors, it's discipleship all the time, in a sense. Train and involve lay people in the work of the ministry. So those are some very important things if you want to have a healthy church. And let's talk for a minute about accountability. Accountability. Everybody needs to be accountable to somebody, to someone, and accountability is vital to the health of the pastor. The pastor must make themselves accountable. As an example, I told you earlier that in the last church I pastored, I transitioned the leadership from being a board elected by the people to one that I chose. And on the first Sunday after the change happened, I stood before the congregation and I said, well, before I share that with you, let me share something else I did. While I don't believe in voting, I even have a hard time with voting on a pastor. But for the sake of the people, I left that in the bylaws because I knew my heart and I knew I would not betray them, but I don't know the heart of the person coming after me. And so we left things in like they still vote on their pastor. If the pastor is not effective, they can still have a business meeting to deal with that, all of that. So I left some safeguards in for the church, even though I don't really think they're necessarily biblical. But anyway, so the Sunday after the change happened, I stood before the people and I said, some of you are wondering, what about the accountability of our pastor? And I want you to know that I've just changed from making myself accountable to 5 people so that now I'm accountable to the whole congregation. And I believed that. I believed that. And that's the way I function. I got to get my fan going here, so give me just a minute. So that's the way I function. We should be accountable. Now, accountability for the pastor doesn't mean I do what the people in the church want me to do. But it means I listen, I make sure my heart's right, and I make myself accountable. Also, you should be accountable to your district officials, to other pastors. You should have people above you speaking into your life, even people as peers speaking into your life. Why? Because each one of us must give account of ourselves to God. So, and it's vital that we understand that. So why do we need accountability? As pastors, why do we need accountability? Let me give you 4 reasons. If you're taking notes, you'll want to take these notes. 4 reasons why we as pastors need accountability. Number 1, because the natural heart is deceitful above all things. Jeremiah 17:9. The natural heart is deceitful above all things, and the ego is inflatable. Galatians 6:3 and 4. Secondly, why do we need accountability? Because ministry is often discouraging. Find that in 2 Corinthians and 2 Timothy. And it's filled with complexity in every way. Philippians 1:22 through 24. Number 3, because the enemy is on the prowl seeking to destroy. That's why we need accountability. The enemy is on the prowl, seeking to destroy. 1 Peter 5:8. And fourth, because the mysteries we proclaim need the clarifying light of dialogue. The mysteries that we proclaim need the clarifying light of dialogue. 2 Peter 3:15 and 16, and 2 John 12. So we need accountability. We need to make ourselves accountable. A lot of times a person does not make themselves accountable because of time pressures of life and ministry. We're so busy. It's not that we don't want to make ourselves accountable. It's not that we don't want other people to speak into our lives. It's that we're so busy and there are so many demands upon our time and our ministry. And we have to realize how we have to pull back from that so that we can make sure that we are accountable. Okay, and there's a lot of ways to make yourself accountable. You can involve yourself in an accountability group. I forget the name. I think the name of it was the Holy Club. Years and years ago, when Whitfield and Wesley and them were out preaching and stuff. I think it's when they were in college. They developed this club and they called it the Holy Club, and they made themselves accountable to one another so that they ask each other questions, and they ask questions such as, did you spend time in fasting and prayer this week, and did you spend time so much time in the Word, did you keep your eyes from lusting after the opposite sex, all these different questions. And then the last question they always asked was, did you lie about any of these things? And they called them, I think it was the Holy Group, and they made themselves accountable. They had this accountability group, and when you're and we could go into that in great detail, but I just think we all need to understand the need for accountability. And then we have devotional needs of the pastor. We all have devotional needs. We all have to make sure that we're spending the time with God that we need to spend with God, and because why? Because if you're constantly giving out to others, you have to constantly take in order to survive in life and ministry. And the problem with too many people is in ministries, we're giving out, but we're not taking in. One pastor has a very interesting way in which he deals with his devotional life. If we're not careful as pastors, we go into our office, we sit down at the desk, and the minute we get down at our desk, we see all the stuff, and we think, oh, I got this sermon, I got this teaching to take care of, and we just start working on that rather than working on our own heart. And he has what he calls the two-chair method. He has two chairs in his office. One is the desk chair behind his desk, but over on the other side of his office, he has another desk that's just his own personal time with God. And when it's time for that, he goes to that desk so that he will not get involved in sermon preparation, administrative stuff. And when he's in that chair, it's just him and God. Okay, the two-chair method. If you want to read a very interesting Psalm 42 was written by priests from the tribe of Levi, and it's a great devotional psalm. But when it comes to our personal devotional time with God, as well as with every other area of life, if we do not control our calendars, they will control us. And we have to schedule our time with God, or it just will not happen. It has to become a priority. You have to schedule in time with God. Now, I'm going to share something, and this probably is going to sound terrible, and it probably is terrible. I wish I could say that every day I have a scheduled time with God. I don't. I try to spend time with the Lord every day. But I have a weekly scheduled time with God, which is Wednesday mornings. Because of my teaching schedule, Mondays and Tuesdays are horrendous. In fact, as I'm teaching you right now, it's a Monday morning just before my next class starts, which starts in about 45 minutes. So I'll have to leave off here in a little while. And but my Mondays and Tuesdays are horrendous. Thursday is horrendous. Friday is, I try to have as a personal day. So Wednesdays, especially in the morning, my wife and I try to fast and pray and spend time with God. And we try not to let things interfere with that. Now, one of the problems I have is our sectional ministers meeting is once a month on a Wednesday morning. And so oftentimes, even though I've made it a priority, all my ministry to go to those meetings, more recently, the last few years, I haven't made too many of them because it falls right during that time, and I've had to make the decision. Have to make the decision: am I going to go to that minister's meeting, or I'm going to spend time with God? Usually, I choose my time with God unless God speaks to me and He tells me to go. Okay, it has to be a priority. You have to put it in your calendar, or it won't happen. So, but what makes it so hard for the minister to maintain a consistent, healthy devotional life? Time pressures, needs, people, responsibility. Sometimes, I could use what we call a Messiah complex, that, I'm their only hope. And all these things will keep us from maintaining that healthy devotional life, when in reality, all these things should be pushing us into that healthy devotional life. But how important are devotional tools? And what do I mean by devotional tools? I don't know about for you, but for me, if I just go into my devotional time and I don't know what I'm going to be doing, don't know where I'm going to be reading, don't know what I'm going to be praying about, if I'm not careful, I can be going through the form of it, but my mind is thinking about something else. And so I am the type of person that it helps me if I have a certain book that I'm reading, a certain location in the Bible that I'm reading and going through a book of the Bible, a prayer regimen. And what I mean by that is there's all kinds of prayer models out there where it keeps you on track praying. And if I'm praying through that prayer, that prayer module, and all of a sudden I find myself again in the mode of saying things but thinking about other things that are going on with the day, I can always bring myself back to where I was the last time I remembered in that prayer regimen. One that I've used many times. For years I had used it. I haven't done it much lately, but for many years I used Larry Lee's prayer regimen. Could you not pray 1 hour? You can find it on Google, and it helps focus you. You're praying for, first you're honoring God. You're going through the Lord's Prayer every day, and you're honoring the Lord, who He is in your life, and you're thanking Him for it. And then you're praying over your own life and direction, and then your wife or your spouse, and then your kids and your grandkids, and lead us not into temptation. You pray through the Lord's Prayer, and you have different prayer focus as you go through it, and it just helps keep you on track. But how does our devotional life enter into our anointing for ministry? It's vital. I told you that Wednesday mornings we try to keep open for the Lord, and my wife said to me one time, she told me, you know what? She said, every time you preach, I receive something, and every time you preach on a Sunday, it's good. But she said, when you preach on a Sunday, I can tell whether you had your Wednesday morning or not. Why? There's a difference. Because I spent time with God. And I'm sharing out of the overflow of what God has given me through the week. Okay. Let's talk for a minute about the pastor's marriage. You have to keep your marriage vibrant. You have to put priority on your marriage. You cannot be so ministry absorbed that your marriage suffers. You cannot be so work absorbed that your marriage suffers. One of the things I learned many years ago is I can't bring all my work and all my issues and all my problems and all my struggles from the office home, because if I do, it's going to affect my marriage adversely. I have learned how to, except in extreme cases, walk out of my office, shut my door, and leave the stuff there, knowing that it's going to be there when I get there the next time, rather than take it home with me. Now, at this stage in my life, because of my busyness and my different hats that I wear, I do have to carry around with me in my briefcase stuff about the church, and sometimes I'm having to do stuff at home in my home office that I'm sitting in right now for church stuff, because I'm not at the church that much. That's different. But when I walk out of this office to go in there to be with my wife, I leave it in this office. Unless it's an extreme emergency. And when you make it a point to leave your office stuff at your office, when you make it a point to do that, and there's that extreme emergency or that big pressure, the family does not look adversely on it, because they know doesn't happen all the time. It just happens once in a while. So you have to keep your marriage vibrant. You have to show her or him how much they mean to you, and they mean to you more than the people. They have to know that. They have to know that they're more important to you than the other people are. How do they know that? Because you put priority on them. You spend time with them. You honor them. You will not take someone else's word over them, and the list goes on and on. When it comes to church administration, we also have to deal with this issue of how you deal with issues of the previous pastor of your church. Many of us go to churches where we're not the founding pastor, and how do we deal with the previous pastor of our church in order to have a healthy ministry? You always have to honor the previous pastor. You say, well, what if he was a scoundrel? You still honor them every way that you can. We had a situation recently in the church that I pastor where the previous pastor, when he left, there was a lot of disgruntled people. There was a lot of disgruntled people, people due to some of his family issues, some of his ministry issues. One of the things that people were disgruntled about is the church had a men's and a women's home where they rented houses, and they had a rehabilitation place for people, men and women, who are on drugs and alcohol, etc., sort of like a teen challenge type thing. And there were all kinds of problems that arose from those houses, all kinds of things that came back and bit the church. There was always money going towards them that the church, some of the people in the church weren't in favor of. So there was a bad taste in many of the people's mouths for that ministry. Well, 2 weeks ago, I didn't plan it this way, it just happened. One of the young ladies in the church come up to me and she said, "Pastor, I am 6 years free and sober today because of what this church did for me with I think it was called Hope House, I believe, for the women. And I'd like to testify about that if I could." And I said, "Sure, come on up here." So I had her share how she's now clean, she's sober, she's free. It's been 6 years. She's got her kids back, and so on and so forth. And after she walked off, the Lord dropped it in my heart. I hadn't thought about it. Dropped it in my heart. And I said something like this. Rather than say, now I know there's a lot of people who didn't like those houses. I didn't say any of that. I simply said, we look back at these houses that the church had in the past prior to my being here. And anytime you have something like that, there can be issues. But let me ask you a question. After what you just heard, was it worth it? Nicole is an indication that it was worth it. What was I doing? I was honoring the previous administration. I was honoring that ministry that you take every opportunity you can to honor. So every pastor is different, and the present pastor needs to focus on the positive aspects of the previous pastor. And as I said, in most churches, the previous pastor was either perfect or a scoundrel. However, in most cases, he was their father, and you are now their stepfather coming in to replace him. And you must recognize that fact and give the people space and give them understanding. You say, how does this fit into church administration? You don't do that, and you'll find out. You have to give the previous pastor, who was their father, whether they enjoyed him or not, space to finally break ties there and allow you to become their father, okay, and allow you to become their pastor. There's a stat that says it takes most people 5 years to become the pastor of the church. In my case here, that wasn't so. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One is there were some problems with the previous pastor. Secondly, we've been in pastoral ministry for many years. We come in as a father figure now because we're older, and it didn't take that long. But you got to recognize all this and give the people space and understanding. And if you don't, it's going to come back and bite you. Because how you treat the previous pastor speaks volumes as to your character. If they hear you browbeating the previous pastor, they're going to wonder what you say about them. Now, one more thing I'd like to bring up along this line. How should a pastor relate to the congregation of a church when he resigns and moves elsewhere? In other words, you were the pastor of the church and you resign and you move elsewhere. How are you now to relate to that church where you were the pastor? You have to cut ties. You have to say, I'm no longer your pastor. You have to do so without hurting their feelings. You have to help them bond to their new stepfather. You have to make sure that you don't get involved in any issues they're having with their new stepfather. You have to help them process that bonding. And oftentimes the best way to do it is to have no contact with them. You should never initiate contact. I pastored the same church in the Bay Area for 18 years. Pastored there so I was a father to many people, a pastor to many people. And when I left, I left. And to this day, well, not now because they just recently made some changes, but up till just recently, there's people over there that still consider me their pastor, even though I've helped them bond with their pastor. And if they were to ask me to perform a wedding for their family or a funeral for their family or want me to come to their house for coffee because they know I'm going to be over there, before I will do it, I contact the pastor and I tell them what is transpiring and ask them if it's okay that I do this. Because if they hear that I've been at that person's house, I want them to know from me instead of from somebody else. And you just have to keep those open lines of communication going with the new pastor. You know what? I'm not sure if I should go any further because the next area. Some of the things I want to talk about next is how to deal with becoming the new pastor of a church. Some things you need to know, and so. So I think I'll hold off there because it is about, I would just get into it and I'd have to cut it off abruptly. I'm hoping these are helping you. I know as I share this stuff along with you reading your book, it's going to help you process everything. And please get your weekly things into me, your weekly reflections and your questions. And when I do the next video, hopefully next week, should be able to do one next week. Sometime I'll try to answer some of your questions. So hope this has been beneficial. God bless you and have a great week.